So yesterday we did the meditation at the beginning, and today we'll do it at the end, and I asked Rob to recite the prayers in the way that you do.
So there is prayer booklet, if you've got it. On page 1 we'll start with refuge and bodhicitta. Sangye
Chiran sogi shonam na chanchu baru dagni gyasuchi dage chenyage besunangi kanshye sangye rupa sho Chiran sogi shonam na chanchu baru dagni gyasuchi dage chenyage besunangi Dola Kanchu Sangye Rupa Sho Chiran Sogi Shonam La Changchu Baru Dagni Kasuchi Dagi Chenye Gibe Sunangi Dola Kanchu Sangye Rupa Sho.
And then up to the short mandala offering. Saji
Mero Rangri Nidevadi Sangye Shinu Ekeruva Giro Kunada Jina Shuvasur Guru Rana Mandala Kanayatayani.
Then the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha on page 2. Enthused by great compassion, he taught the immaculate Dharma, the dispeller of the confused, you, the Buddha of Dharma, make prostrate for immeasurables. May all sentient
Means of happiness and the cause of happiness.
may all
Sentient beings bring the cause of suffering. All sentient beings never be separated from the happiness without suffering. Sentient beings, equanimity, free of attachment, made
those close. The Heart Sutra.
Let's leave it. Let's use our time for some teachings. So I was reminded by Rob that I promised to talk some technicalities. Yeah. And so yesterday we explored a bit how to, in a way, open a meditation. Because one of the most common reasons why people stop meditating is that they become frustrated. And that has to do with our approach to meditation rather than with meditation itself. And I think that is always an important point to keep looking at it. Whether, regardless of the content of or the exact quality of a meditation, it should be always joyful. It should always be a moment in a way of coming home, as Thich Nhat Hanh often called it. If we don't do that, it becomes a chore. It becomes something extra that we have to do in one way or another. And that is truly a waste of our time. That is not necessary. Yeah. Moreover, the practice of thank you. The practice of calm abiding is very popular, and an additional challenge that we encounter is that we are, as a culture, we are doers rather than lookers. And for a meditation practitioner, it is important to turn that the other way around, to do less and to look more. Yeah. Because if you do so, the looking itself, and that is one of the remarkable aspects of our mind, to look mindfully in and of itself calms. Mindfulness brings with it an impartial, equanimous attitude. And when you look mindfully at the mind itself, it's the attitude itself that calms the mind quite by itself. If you enforce something on the mind will resist you. So the way you work becomes the obstacle itself. As beings, we depend on the mind. So if you apply force, where do you think the force comes from? From the mind itself. And so you try to calm the mind by doing a troubling thing. And that, of course, is not going to work. That's the same thing with meditating, with a constant evaluation if this is going anywhere. It becomes a distraction in and of itself. So you don't want to do that. And so the only way to avoid that, and then we come back to the larger topic, is to know why this works. And that is where I find, at least myself, studying to be very empowering, because it shows you the mechanics of meditation. For example, yesterday I touched shortly upon the fact that what is rarely explored is that in the definition of mindfulness is the holding of a familiar object. If you really know what that means, that definition itself tells you how meditation works. You become familiar. The more familiar you become by simply keeping to look at the same thing, the more powerful your mindfulness becomes. So there's nothing you have to do. Mindfulness does itself. Its deployment is enough. And so you can't push that, because when you push it, you start to add additional activities, which does not allow you to become familiar, because you start to disturb the mind in between. So that's not helpful. Yeah.
That does not apply to analytical meditation.
That also applies to analytical meditation, actually. Yes. Yeah, that's exactly why analytical meditation works as well.
Logic of because
No, but not in the way you think. Yeah. So the question is here about analytical meditation. And I think we often misunderstand what analytical meditation is. We mistake contemplation for analytical meditation. But contemplation is something else. Contemplation is where we have studied something and then we make an effort to become familiar with what we've studied. So we reason it through, like what on earth does it mean what I've read? For example, you've studied the definition of mindfulness, you know it by heart by now, but it doesn't mean anything to you. So what is the holding of an object? What is familiarity? What is the prevention or the safeguarding against distractions? And so you use contemplation in order to figure out what you have studied. But once you know, you don't need to do all that reasoning on your cushion anymore. Because now you have sharpened your insight. You have an understanding. And analytical meditation is using that understanding to look at your experience in a certain way. So when I investigate my own awareness, for example, I'm not using the definition of mindfulness. I know the definition of mindfulness and I know what it means. So I look in a specific way, is this happening? So I have a knowing because I've sharpened my wisdom to be able to discern, but for that I don't need the reasoning anymore. And so analytical meditation is the application of an understanding to your lived experience. But for that you need already to have done analysis or to have done contemplation so that you can use your tools. Now, for example, to give an interesting example is that when you look, for example, at karma, so full karma requires that you have got the base right. You want to act to a certain object, and in some cases you miss the object entirely. And so you develop an understanding of okay, that is the case. So full karma, for example, has a good understanding, as an understanding of the basis towards which it is acting. And then you explore like how the way objects appear to you and how your mind reacts towards them interact. So you use that understanding then to start to explore how an experience is constructed. But if you then still have to reason all the time, you end up not looking at all. So an analytical meditation is the application of your understanding to a direct experience. That is like the difference, one could say, between studying surgery and actually doing surgery. You know, you don't want to do open heart surgery with your book open, like the heart. Oh, that's there, and it has 4 chambers. Oh, you don't want a surgeon like that. You want a surgeon that is well informed, that has done his or her studies, and then can work towards the problem and solve the problem. And that is the same what you do in deep analytical meditation. Especially when on the basis of calm abiding, you can't do that type of thinking anymore. That's not possible. So you use insights to make something visible, to make something explicit in your experience. But you do that on the basis of having a deep understanding of the Dharma. And that is exactly the importance of the interaction between studies, contemplation, and both calm meditation and analytical meditation. Yeah. Another good example would be, well, now that we have started on this topic anyway, so if you complain, it's her fault. In some Theravada traditions, even calm abiding is called analytical meditation. And in a way, it's a good example. Because what do we often do when we do calm abiding meditation is to stare at the breath for a very long time. And then people are very frustrated with the fact that it doesn't go anywhere. And why doesn't it go anywhere? Because they don't do any analysis. What does a Sangha tell you? What does Vasubandhu tell you? You have to look actively. For example, you practice something actively called the 4 correct. There's so many different translations of that term that I sometimes forget which one it is. The 4 correct forms of attention, one could say, or the 4 correct practices. So you actively analyze which hindrances are present to suppress them, which hindrances are absent so that you keep them absent, which supportive mental factors are present so that you can nourish them, and which supportive mental factors are absent so that you can arise them. So it's not about staring at the breath, it is about analyzing the mind that is holding the breath. Only the higher concentrations of the formless realms are considered non-analytical meditation, because then you just start to drop things. But everything else requires measures of analysis, actually. So you very actively engage with both the object and the subject aware of the object. And it is that very active engagement with the breath, for example, or your visualization of the Buddha that allows you to absorb, because it makes it interesting. Because then you become so engaged with the object that you forget everything else. And what is calm abiding? When the mind forgets to do all the other things and simply is applied to a single phenomenon. And so it is the active engagement with your experience. And that matters both in insight meditation as well in calm abiding. So you're always very actively engaging with whatever is appearing to you. Our business is experience, it's the analysis of experience. And so when we talk about calm abiding practice, we analyze the symptoms. When we practice insight meditation, we analyze the sickness. That's the difference. So when we do calm abiding meditation, we analyze what distraction does to our mind. And because normally we take distraction to be personal. Like, I want to think about that. Then if you do that, then you can also not do that. Try for 5 seconds and see if your mind is willing to do that. Then you come to the conclusion that it's not personal at all. Distraction happens. It seems nice until you realize that you think about the same thing all the time. There's not much nice to it. And the same thing with torpor. No, we think that a little bit of torpor is actually restful. But when you really observe, it's the opposite. Torpor is very bad for the mind. When you let your mind sink, it comes out worse than you started with. So you start to notice that these things are not personal in contrast to what they seem to be. And they seem to be able to perform a function which they don't do under analysis. And so that is what you do when you practice calm abiding. You actively look, and the knowing of this overcomes these hindrances because they lose their illusory power. As long as you leave intact that your fantasies are personal, they keep coming back. You can't overcome them. Only when you've seen deeply, there's nothing personal about them. I fantasize about the same thing all the time. Well, actually, I don't fantasize at all. Fantasies happen. There's nothing personal about them at all. And they're highly repetitive. And Lama Yeshe always said that once you've seen the content of your mind, you never have to watch television again. But I always say that you would, because in your head, you have the worst television channel ever. No one would pay for the content of your mind. It's the worst episode of any soap opera, endlessly repeated. It's as boring as it gets. And so the moment you puncture that illusion, it stops. That's what calm abiding does. But you can only do that when you have an active engagement with your experience, like, what on earth am I seeing? And so that is an important aspect, because what do we do when we practice calm abiding, for example? We try to force the mind to go back. And what do you not do when you force the mind to go back? Is look. Because you have rejected what happened. Rather than seeing the mind was distracted. Why is it distracted? Because the mind believes there's purpose in doing so. But when you just work in a goal-oriented way, you end up endlessly bringing your mind back without much ever changing. You just do the same thing over and over and over, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, and your mind is as much of a mess as you started with. But when you show the mind, there's nothing pleasurable here. It's not personal. That illusion is gone. So it is the knowing that creates calm abiding. It's the knowing of the symptoms that generates calm abiding. It's the knowing of the sickness that will produce the path of seeing, the path of liberation. Yeah. Does it make sense? Yeah. And that also makes it fun. That's why I said yesterday, the importance, because I hear in many centers there's like a study community and there's a meditation community. Yeah. And they should come together because the meditators have something to offer to the studiers and vice versa. And they will be much enlightened by each other. Yeah. And because in that sense, your question is pertinent. Because without knowing anything, what are you going to look at? And my abbot used to say, well, when you meditate on the breath, you will figure out that you breathe. That's it. But that you knew to begin with. To know that you breathe, that you already knew, so it becomes boring very quickly. That's why people give up. It's boring to stare at your breath endlessly. Much more exciting when you observe that your mind has, for example, difficulty staying on, and to wonder, like, why does it have difficulty? And then when you have studied a lot, then there's many things to observe. For one thing, you could say, well, I don't have familiarity yet. I don't see actually much. Oh, that's cool. And to observe that when you keep observing the breath, you start to see more and more detail. And that there's actually all kinds of techniques to elicit more detail from that experience. There's an infinite amount of things to see in the breath. And that is really absorbing when it happens. And then you start to see the interaction between the growing familiarity and the growing power of your mindfulness, that the growing power of your mindfulness allows more detail. And you see, and then you can meditate completely at ease because you see this is a self-sustaining circle. Now I don't have to do anything anymore. Again, the only thing that there is to do is to look deeply, to look in a knowing fashion. And when you study Buddhist psychology, you know how your mind is composed. And then you can tweak a little bit. For example, that you have something that's called investigation. It's where the mind enthusiastically moves towards the object. You can do that. That's cool to do. And one of my teachers calls it throwing. Yeah, the other one is called well, it also is a bit of a, sometimes these English translations are completely random. Investigation analysis. The other one is, he calls robbing. So investigation is to move the mind towards the object. It's like, I want to know. And then once you are on the object, then to look deeply, like what on earth am I looking at? To look with great enthusiasm at the details. And so that's a really useful technique, but you wouldn't know if you hadn't studied that this is an aspect of your mind, that you can actively use it. You see that one of the things that drives our mind, for example, is trust, especially trust in ourselves. And that when you keep meditating and you become simply good by doing the same thing over and over, that this grants you an impressive amount of trust in yourself and in your capacity to navigate your mind. That you actually have an exquisite mental factor that is called wisdom. That your mind can tell for itself if something is skillful and wholesome. That you can know for yourself if something contributes to your well-being or not. That no one else needs to tell you. Because normally we rely heavily on the world around us to tell us what to do and what not to do. And we talk about freedom, but when it's in front of us, we run away. Now, earlier before this, I recorded a teaching for the in-depth meditation training. And I related the story that after my 3 years of retreat, I told you yesterday, I became the resident teacher in Amsterdam. And so I get out of the airport, and all of a sudden half of Amsterdam seemed, half of the men in Amsterdam seemed all of a sudden to sport beards. From my not knowing perspective, it looked like the Taliban had overtaken Amsterdam. Like, did everyone become Muslim all of a sudden? What's going on here? Turned out to have to do with, I think, men watching too many Viking movies or something. And they all believe that there's an individual expression of an expression of their individuality. Like, yeah, all of you together, that is really individual expression of your individual character. Yeah, really. You're just doing what everyone else does because that is the cool thing to do. That's not freedom. No. When everyone sports a beard to shave off your own, that might be an interesting choice. Yeah. Or to know that you could do it, that you wouldn't mind. But that's difficult. Because then you might walk into a pub or your work and then people are like, that looks silly, your bare face. And then you have to stand up for your own choice. Like, well, find it easier. It's less itchy. And so to start a bit at the beginning again, what I want to advocate for is the interaction between studies, contemplation, and meditation. And I think even in my own monastic life, I found these often very divorced. I've been in places where people meditated with very little understanding and often getting really stuck. In a monastery in Burma where I meditated, in a forest monastery, there was someone that had been working on calm abiding for 35 years and never managed. And there's someone that just keeps bumping into the same obstacle rather stubbornly, but uselessly. Never acknowledging or recognizing the challenge that he has, and thereby not knowing the challenge not being able to overcome it. And that's sad. You think like the Buddha taught 84,000 methods. If method 1 doesn't work for you, you move on to method 2. But if you don't know of a method 2, you end up endlessly trying method 1. It was also a highly competitive environment. So then people just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. But I think, well, you just stop pushing, you sidestep. That is the easier way to work. And on the other hand, I've seen people endlessly studying and developing pride over their understanding. Like, look at me. I can explain all the 7 reasonings negating inherent existence. Yeah, good for you. But you still become angry. So what's the point? You still feel prideful about your studies. What's the point? As Nagarjuna says, the Dharma is not medicine, it's poison. It just feeds the beast that we already have. But the interaction is very helpful. And so when I study a lot, I either meditate or study or, well, talk. That's about the summary of my whole life. Yeah, and I have lunches. Yeah, and I sleep sometimes in between. Yeah. And I love that simplicity. But when I open a Dharma book, I am looking for something. I'm looking to enrich my understanding, to look deeper. I'm both interested in fresh ways of looking and fresh ways also to talk. And because if you repeat the same story of how you explain the Dharma over and over, at one point it loses its freshness. And people think like, I heard that before. And so I'm always looking for new weaponry to shoot at ignorance. And so I'm either looking for a new way of explaining the same thing, like new wording, new imagery, new analogies, new stories, or I'm looking for new personal insights, new ways of looking at the same thing that I had not explored before, also to keep it fresh on my own cushion. And so when I go to teachings or when I take a book, I'm not interested if these are complex or easy teachings or whatever. I'm always looking for a fresh perspective. I still love listening to the Four Noble Truths, even despite the fact that I've studied this for the past 40 years. But to find a different teacher that explains it in a different way, I think, wow, I'd not looked at it like that before. That's amazing. Like early this afternoon, I looked at a little commentary by Professor J. Garfield that now is in Tasmania. I will not visit him, to his great disappointment, and mine as well. He's lovely. And one important aspect in the Dharma is the 12 links of dependent origination. I was looking at his commentary, and he has sometimes these very approaches that are really novel. And I was reading it, sort of like, I've been looking at the 12 links truly for 40 years now. And after 40 years to find someone that explains them in a way that you think like, that's also an interesting approach, actually. I'd never considered it in that way. That is the way you can keep doing the same thing for 40 years because it stays exciting. Because there's no end to the ways you can look at the same thing. And so I'm like a child. When I have a new book, I have taught myself not to tell anyone. I've taught myself not to tell everyone that I got a new book. So I won't tell you what I bought today. But my mind still has that, like when you're a child, when you get a new toy, like after Christmas, you got your package, you have your new toy, you can't sleep because you want to play with it. I'm 56 now, and when I have a new book, I still have the same thing. Yeah. I don't want to sleep, I want to just read it. Yeah. Because it always provides something fresh, something exciting to meditation. And then when I've read it, now my mind wants to hold it because it holds it, it sees that it is wholesome. The Dharma is like nothing else. It is so poetic in its elegance. How all these aspects of the Dharma fit together in a non-artificial way is also, by the way, really, it makes teaching Dharma very easy because you can just move from anything to anything else. No, you can take two random aspects of the Dharma and say, again, can you talk these two together? And I can do that because they all are interlinked. And so to come from a book and then to find a new entry point, and then to have had the mind preoccupied with it and to reason through it and to be engaged with it and to look at it from the left and to the right, but especially to make it mine, to make it part of my experience. And then to sit on the cushion and to think, oh, I have a completely new way of looking at the same thing. Let's explore this. Like new territory to see. And so it is with that motivation that you can make these things work. You should not study because you should. Should never impresses your mind. When you tell your mind, I should do my commitments now, then leave it. It's already no longer working. But that's so often, like I see that so much with tantric practitioners. At one point they gave up on even the word, they gave up on their commitments. It's not my commitment. Doing Tara practices is cool. Especially when I've done it for 20 years, it's part of my life. And so I said yesterday, if I ever become world dictator, a few words will go. And so one of the words I will make disappear as well as the word meditation. That will also definitely go. Yeah. And Tibetan is called gom, in Pali Sanskrit, bhavana, and it means to cultivate. And cultivation points to the fact that our mind has a habitual way of looking at the world, which is unskillful. And how do we know it's unskillful? Because otherwise you would not be sitting here. Because everyone at one point runs into the behavior of their own minds. If it were skillful, it would produce what you seek. And we all seek to be content or contented. And yet here we are. We are not contented at all. Because if you were contented, calm abiding meditation would be so easy. Because you would just say, I'm content. And the mind would just silence. But your mind is not contented. Your mind doesn't realize that it is producing its own discontent. And so when we talk about bhavana or gom, we try to cultivate a new way of looking at our own lived experience in order to induce contentment, to bring the trust that we seek, to bring refuge, safety, the unconditional care that we all seek to our lives. And so from the beginning of the Dharma, that cultivation always implied studies, listening to the Buddha, listening to Shariputra, listening to Chenrezig. Hey, you want to listen to someone that has walked the path before you because it's inspiring. I'm a great fan of Shariputra. And people loved to be with him because he was exquisite to be with. Extremely gifted meditator, very knowledgeable, but extremely caring. And so people just enjoyed his company. In fact, one of my favorite sutras, the Anathapindiko Vada Sutta, tells the story of the lay practitioner Anathapindika, he who gives to the poor, which his name means. In the final days of his life, at one point he becomes ill and he knows he's dying. And he sends off his attendant. And interestingly enough, he does not send his attendant to the Buddha. He says, well, go to the Buddha, says hello, and then walk on to Shariputra. Implicitly stating, Shariputra is my friend. I flourish in the presence of Shariputra. When Shariputra speaks, I hear something that I might not even hear when I hear the Buddha speak. I relish our relationship, the trust that I have in that relationship. And so in his final moments, Shariputra is sitting next to him and is talking to him. because in that trust relationship, in the relationship of him, his appreciation for what Shariputra has achieved in his life, Anathapindika flourishes. He managed to do quite well for himself, even in the final moments of his life. And so to listen to the Dharma, to study the Dharma, is to seek that relationality. Then your mind wants to. I like listening to His Holiness is always fantastic. I mean, this guy can talk. As they said about, what was his name again? This great physicist in the wheelchair, Stephen Hawking. I always say it takes a great mind to understand quantum physics. It takes a greater mind to be able to explain it in simple terms. And His Holiness has that quality. Here I can explain you Chandrakirti like I should have always understood, until you open the book by Chandrakirti and think, I don't understand a thing. But when His Holiness explains it, it all just makes sense. Yeah. And always in such a lived way, and so on and so forth. And there's many great teachers around. I just found out today that you have Ajahn Brahm around the corner. Also a very gifted teacher that can explain the most complex ideas as though you should have always just simply known. Yeah. And when you develop and cultivate, and that is where meditation starts, where my cultivation starts. When you think in that way, oh, that's fantastic. I'd love to hear more. That listening to the Dharma or studying a good book is not an effort. Your mind wants to go there. And so that should, difficult in our language to overcome bad words. Should is another word that should go, like ought. Ought also ought to go. And you can't force the mind. We exist in dependence on the mind. So we often chase our own tail in that way. So when you make the mind do something, the mind is going around in circles. It's not noticing itself. And so that creates a space of distrust, of always being in conflict with yourself. I don't study enough. I don't contemplate enough. I don't meditate enough. I don't pay much attention to my mantra practice, and so on and so forth. At one point you give up. Like there's something wrong with this practice. No, there's nothing wrong with the practice. There's often something wrong with the way we relate to ourselves. The only way to make the mind do something is by showing it what it won't like to do. So get to know your mind, and then give the Dharma to your mind in a way that suits your mind. Like my mind, for example, really likes good stories. Yeah. Above all, the Jataka stories, my favorite part of the canon. They're delightful parables. You know, when I'm tired of all the philosophy and the complexity, I just love reading those. Because they're delightful. They are the product of 2,500 years of Indian Buddhist culture. I mean, they were definitely not all told by the Buddha, but who cares? And they allow you to look at yourself from a very different perspective. And when you imagine yourself to be the Monkey King, forming a bridge so that your people can cross from one side of the river to the other side of the river, running away from a king. Now, when you read the story, you put yourself into that individual. You identify with that individual. And you learn that you might just aspire to being able to do that. And you come out of that story feeling the Monkey King, the Ruru deer, and so on and so forth. That's to find entry points that touch your heart like nothing else, and to use them as the entry point of the rest of the Dharma, to explore from there. And when the Dharma becomes dry again, you go back to your Jataka stories or the life stories of the Mahasiddhas or whatever, or maybe philosophy, if that is your thing to read. You might want to go back and again as His Holiness does. His Holiness always says, the only text I always bring around is Chandrakirti's commentary to Nagarjuna. That's his favorite text. He loves it. He studied it his entire life. So you imagine that he's actually memorized it. And despite the fact that he has memorized it, he still reads it because it's beautiful. It's elegant. It's profound. It's poetic. And then study practice is not, then studying seems such a burden. I just like, I always say you can sell everything with French. In French, I have a beautiful word. It's called le merveille. You can. We should have tried it this afternoon. English, by the way, is a nice word as well for this. It's wonder. A sense of wonder, a sense of a childlike relationality with something. Like you see it for the first time. Like, wow. Because the moment you have that, you already absorb, you're halfway calm abiding. It's as simple as that. There's nothing more to it, really. So when you can bring that to your studies, they become fun. Your mind wants to go. Your mind absorbs this material without making much effort. But also you allow your mind to absorb it, for example, in its own pace, in the way it needs to do that. We all have different capacities. We all have the same amount of capacities. But some of us have a quicker heart. Some of us have a quicker mind. It doesn't matter. So if you need 10 years to understand Chandrakirti, good on you. Enjoy those 10 years. If you need 2 weeks, that's also fine. Neither is superior to the other, but have fun with the text. Enjoy the merveille of Chandrakirti. Yeah. Because in the end, we will all end up in the same place, hopefully. And only when you approach that with a sense of wonder, it stays with you. Because you approach it as something that matters to you. Something that informs you in a novel way, in a wholesome way about your own life. Like, oh, I had not looked at myself in that way. Like when you study karma, what we just talked about, we often talk about it in a very normative way. When you do something bad, you get punished. Who on earth wants to study that? I mean, for Buddha's sake. That's terrible. That's not what it means. It simply means that our mind is a conditioned phenomenon. Whatever you do with it changes it. That's it. That's very empowering, actually. Because once you figure it out, you know where your power lies. So then you know, like, oh, all these things that went wrong in the past are not my fault. My mind was just mistaken. That's it. That's cool. No guilt, no remorse, no, I'm not good enough, blah, 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 blah. You're free. Let it go. And often, I think you recite the 7 in prayer, I guess, on a regular basis. You have this thing that's called confessions. In other words, if I become a dictator, you will magically forget the word. It will disappear from your language. Yeah. Because it's exactly this. It's just saying, in the safety of the Buddha, this was not my fault. I did not intend to harm. And even when I thought I intended to harm, it was because I misunderstood something about our relationship. If I had known how I and the other person exist and interexist, I would not have intended that. But I didn't know. I just responded to my belief. My belief was wrong. That happens. And that's okay. So then you can just put that burden down. That's what karma is all about. Not your fault, but it has consequences. So you can take up responsibility, and that is where you really want to be. Because in the context of confession, you're a victim of yourself. Come on. Yeah, but we do that often, and then we wonder why the cushion is such a burden. Of course, when you tell yourself like you're a victim or you're bad or whatever you have, who wants to sit on that cushion in that way? I shall do confession now. Oh, Buddha, sorry, I've sinned again. I mean, come on, that's terrible. That's self-punishment. That's us misunderstanding our own cultural religious context for a Buddhist one. That's not the point. There's someone sitting in front of you that knows that you're empty of these things. Sit in front of the Buddha, you see the Buddha knowing, caring for you unconditionally, knowing that this is not your nature. And in that safety, you can say like, shit happens. It's not my fault. And in the presence of the Buddha, we can find the courage to let go of our victimhood and become agents of our own fate. Now that I know that I'm a conditioned phenomenon, I can take charge of my conditioning. Wisdom is the guide to my better conditioning. That make sense? Yeah. So make the Dharma work for you. So both in studies, help your mind want it. Find out what your mind responds to. Learn to listen to it. When you study a text, see if there's different ways you can approach it. Look at the different responses to different forms of Buddhist canon. There's a good reason why we have so much different canon. We have path texts like the Lamrim. We have philosophical texts like Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka. We have massive amount of stories. We have all this enormous plethora of material. See how your mind responds to these different things. Maybe sometimes you want to study one thing, maybe sometimes you want to look at something else. Do it in such a way that your mind keeps wanting to go back to it over and over. And that you fill your mind, instead of the terrible soap opera that we normally have to listen to all day long, that we fill our heads with something more exciting. Because in the beginning, the mind is not silent. It will do much anyway. We might as well give it something more useful, more pleasant, more wonder-filled to do. That you go about your day like, oh, let's have a free moment. I shall think about this now. That's cool. Enjoy thinking about this. And that might be a good narrative. There might be a wonderful piece of philosophy. It might be a psychological insight in yourself, like, oh, I never noticed that I work in this way. That's fantastic. Let's explore this a bit. That's contemplation. And then these things become yours. I tell the monkey story king, well, for two reasons, because I invented another one for myself. That's called the banana king, but I shall not do that to you. But I've used that story. The story is mine. I understand myself by way of the story. I think often about it. I like the delicious story. I've told it often. I've told it so often that I'm not entirely sure if I'm canonical anymore. Who cares? It's mine. It's my version of the Jataka of the Monkey King. You know that it matters to me. It matters to the way I am constituted. It tells me, it informs me about myself. And it's the same with all kinds of text. There is Asanga's Mahayana Sutra Alamkara, for example, is one of my favorite texts. Atisha's Compendium or Ontology of Ethics is also, these are texts that are mine. I go back to them over and over because I love these texts. They become part of my existence. So I don't need to force. I don't need to tell myself I should study them. Yeah. If you give me half a moment, my iPad is open and you know what is on the front page. Yeah, when all things are done, I like to go back to calm. So I can just sit. And in all this calm, with my understanding of the Dharma, I can just gently look. I don't need to go through all kinds of complex reasonings as I've done before. I can just simply, calmly look around. Like, oh, seems like an image of a knower from this side. But I know it to be unreal. I don't even need to say that. I recognize that this is unreal appearance there. The studies are done. And so I can see it, I can let it go, and emptiness appears. Now, when I meditate on emptiness, I don't do much. That's actually the point. I know what I'm looking at. Because I know what I'm looking at, I can let it go. When you look at the great master Asanga, that I just mentioned, he uses, when he talks about calm abiding, but what is true of calm abiding is true of insight meditation as well, emptiness meditation. And so these descriptions work universally. He says something interesting, and that's not a word that I would happily make disappear if I could. We translate a word called kurdiya in Sanskrit as laziness. And yeah, that's also one of these non-inviting words. We go very quickly from the mind is lazy to I'm lazy, and then we're off the cushion again. Like, I'm not talking to myself in that way. It's not what it means. Now he shows, what he wants to point out is that our mind to us and to itself is often unserviceable. Because it seeks to serve us. This is what you can see that both from body and mind. And what I highlighted yesterday, there's a constant flux of activity that is all meant to serve us. And I'm sitting here, my stomach is doing something, my intestines is doing something, and my lungs and my heart, and there's like an enormous amount of activities going on completely outside of my awareness without, if any of that stops, I all of a sudden fall over, as you have noticed. Yeah. And my mind does the same thing. Like, I recognize you, but I don't need to make an effort to recognize and know that you're Pauline. And somehow my mind provides me with that information. You never realize that it is the case. I know that you're Fiona, but I don't, it's not like I have to look in like my archive. Like I met someone yesterday, it was a woman, not a man. My mind just furbishes me with that understanding. It recognizes you, sees the differences, sees the similarities. It provides me with all that information that allows me, I know that you speak English, Dutch or French or Spanish or Russian. Well, I don't speak Russian, so that would be entirely useless. It's amazing when you realize what your mind does before you become aware. All this stuff is being done. It's amazing. So it wants to, but it becomes deflated by its own misunderstanding. And Asanga highlights this as being non-serviceable. It tries to serve us. It tries to serve us contentment, purpose, closeness, connection. And yet it doesn't. It can't deliver what it aims to deliver. And so it's not the mind's fault. It's the fault of a misunderstanding. It doesn't know. There's something in what it sees which is not real. Yeah. This evening is too short to explain that. That's what all emptiness is all about. It's mistaken. It's not his fault. But it's important to recognize it. And Asanga talks about the fact that there's three forms, and there's many more forms, but there's three major forms of unserviceability. And unserviceability, and always feel free to reinterpret or reuse different words if that suits you better. Like, I don't like the word laziness. I know it doesn't really mean that, but when I see it, I think, so I just substitute it. I don't use it. When I explain Sangha, I will never, the text that I produce, I consistently delete the word laziness and I substitute it. I actually even did with my own tantric practices. It was the point in time that I rewrote my entire tantric practices. Like, I'm not talking to myself in that way. It doesn't, like when in my early days of Tantra, I thought that's not the dialogue that I'm having. This makes no sense to me. It doesn't move me. If I'm doing this practice for the next 60 years of my life, I need a different relationship with it. You just took the text and I rewrote the whole thing in terms that made sense to me, in terms that I thought were poetic and well-sounding. I thought, okay, now I have a cool Tara practice. This I like to do. And then bit by bit I let go and I came back to the original text. And so that you have the freedom to do that. And it is there for you to use, not to impose it upon you. You should not accept things because Tsongkhapa says so, or the Dalai Lama says so. There is no point to that. That's subjection to some authoritarian. That's not what this is all about. It's about your freedom. And when we subject ourselves to some external authority, that's not freedom, that's slavery. We've all had enough of that. That's always holiness, for example, gives you things. Tsongkhapa offers you things. And that's for you to do with it what you want. And the Buddha said that from the beginning in the Kalama Sutra. Don't believe me. Don't accept it because other people have said it, or because I'm important and I'm the guru. Figure out for yourself, test it. If it improves your well-being, use it. If it doesn't, let it go. That's entirely up to you. Same thing with Lam Rim practice. Do it in any way you want. It has a beginning and it has an end, but if you want to start halfway, good on you. Doesn't matter. Anyway, so unserviceability, I find a far more interesting word. It tries to service, but it can't. It tries to offer me something. And the same thing with the body. Often we impose things on the body and then the body complains. So the body becomes unserviceable. And you can question yourself, like, why is it unserviceable? Well, because maybe I don't give it the right food. I eat too much junk food. Or maybe I need to exercise more. Or maybe I need to exercise less. Maybe I don't need to do bodybuilding. Maybe just a good run in the morning is better for me. And that's the same thing with regard to the mind. So it's unserviceable for a reason. So it's important to figure out, why is it struggling? And so you see that our mind, and that's the first one that Asanga highlights, procrastinates a lot. Well, there's many different reasons why it procrastinates, and that is alone, that's worthwhile of investigating for a month or two. Like, why is your mind always running away? Why doesn't it want to engage with the present? Well, because you use should all the time, for example. Yeah. So whenever you come up with should, your mind runs away. It doesn't work because you're imposing. And it's a weird thing because you, as a person, depend on the mind. You go in circles, and of course it doesn't work. It's like self-flagellation. There's no point. So simply to find like, oh, my mind procrastinates because I impose something on the mind. That gives you and that opens the door to a new approach. Like maybe I don't want to do that anymore. Maybe I want to have a conversation with my mind why this matters to me. Maybe that's more interesting. Or maybe I want to read a different book. Like for a while I did a first year university in philosophy in London. But I mean, British philosophers. I thought Germans were bad, but my, oh my. Yeah. So this book on epistemology, and you know, the first paragraph was one sentence. And it was like, come on. I mean, we invented, you know, how it calls interpunction. You can use it, you know, you can break up the sentence. It's not necessary to sound like Shakespeare. Yeah. Then I found like I found an actually American philosopher. American philosopher was actually often much better in being transparent. And I read exactly the same text and I thought, yeah, this is much more fun to read. He's actually a much better writer. He's not self-important. He really wants to convey an idea to me. And I like to be addressed in that way. I don't want some professor to point out to me how important and well-versed and eloquent he is. I mean, that's not of my, I want someone to convey to me why it is very good for me to know that. And so I just chucked one book and I bought myself another book and I thought, oh, that's really fun to read. And so manage that subject because I took a fun book. And so, and as I said, highlighted yesterday, our mind also procrastinates a lot because it fears our own judgment. Because when we say ought, we all had already, the calculus has already started. And so it is very afraid of what you're going to say about it when it has failed again. And so it sets itself up for failure and so on and so forth. And you could think of 1,000 different reasons why your mind procrastinates. And when you can answer that question, like, why is it doing that? What function is it trying to serve? Then you know how to overcome it. And it's a wonderful dialogue with yourself. And that's why Asanga says that the first step is often called faith as the antidote, but in a way it means trust. Of course, trust in the method and so on and so forth, but that's not the most important aspect. Because when you find out why your mind is procrastinating and you can respond to it, you develop trust in you, like I can. And the method matters to me. Because now all of a sudden I'm no longer procrastinating. I've answered the foundational question about myself. And all of a sudden, rather than procrastinating, my mind can't wait to get started because it loves to work in that way. Then you have a good answer. And then the second form of unserviceability is that our mind invests all kinds of, lots of activities and all kinds of things that don't contribute to us as much. And again, there's much to explore. But for example, as I highlighted earlier, and many of the activities that we engage in because everyone does so. And there's many things that we do unquestioningly. Like at the moment, I think everyone works 60, 70 hours. Like, why? I don't know about you, but when I started to work in the 1980s, we worked 40 hours max. Yeah. And it included a drink on Friday evening. Yeah. And so all of a sudden we all accept to keep our phones on. And so we engage in all kinds of activities like social media and watching soap operas because everyone does so and so on and so forth, rather than taking, just to observe like, well, why am I doing that? Does it contribute to me? Am I being tricked? Am I just doing what everyone else does? You have to think for yourself, like, do I actually like that? Is binge watching ever fun? No. Okay, I cancel my subscription. I just do that because of habit. And once you start with episode 1, you end up automatically at episode 10 because that is the way it is made. It's made to control you. That's the way they make money. That's the way they keep you paying the subscription. It's just a form of addiction. It makes you restless, and you try to solve the restlessness with creating more restlessness. And at one point you think like, this is not working. Maybe I just quit. And then again, you have a dialogue. Like, I found that simplicity in my life was much more comfortable. I don't like all this goal-orientedness in my existence. I mean, in the end, when I pass away, like, I don't know about you, but I mean, many of us are old enough to know that many of the things we do don't matter that much in the long run. No, I designed entire archives that don't exist anymore. I wrote software that no one uses anymore. There's like a long list of things that I built and designed and wrote and that no one will ever look anymore. Once you notice that, you become more relaxed about it. I mean, I don't need to be important. I said yesterday when I became ordained, that was actually one of the most gratifying things. I'm no one now. I never have to tell anyone anymore who I am. It's no one's business, not even my own business. It's a boring story. I have a present in front of me. That's enough. I just enjoy this. I'm sitting on my cushion, I'll read a good book, but it's pretty simple. And when my life is simple, I don't need much money either. That's why I traveled so much, because that's one of the things I enjoyed. I don't need to go to bars. I don't need to buy stuff. I always thought that stuff was more of a prison. But if you don't need anything, if you just need a bed and a little kitchenette, I don't say then that you need to do that. Maybe you do need a house or whatever, but it needs to be your choice. And so that's the second form of unserviceability. When we enter in that dialogue with ourselves, like what does contribute to my well-being and what does not, you find surprising answers. And what you're left with meets your needs. And my need is still many books. That's why I'm a Gelug monk and not a Zen monk. Yeah. So I like that. That's part of my life. That's part of the way I work. That's fine. So that's one thing that I have many of. That's entirely fine. There's other things that I don't have Netflix or any other subscription for that matter, because I find no purpose in it. It does not bring simplicity. It does not bring calm, contentment, and ease to my life. It doesn't mean that I never watch a movie because I am in the world and I want to know sometimes something about this world, but I'm selective. Sometimes I watch something because I want to learn something about the world that I live in, like what is everyone watching, or what does a certain form of film or theater tell about the world that I'm living in. I'm not a forest monk at the moment, so I need to know something about the world that I'm engaged in. So, but then I make choices. I deliberately say, okay, this evening I shall engage in the movie for a change. But then I get from it what I want, and then it's satisfactory. When I'm done with it, satisfaction is had, I can let go. And so that creates the simplicity, the calm, the spaciousness in your life in which you can engage. So then the second form of unserviceability ends quite by itself. And the third one, and that is prevalent, so prevalent in our society, is the unserviceability with regard to not feeling good enough. And we have a whole guilt culture. Now that I like meditation retreats and I'm having interviews with people, there's days that I would like to go back to the past and tell myself that everyone feels the same way. I always felt that I was the worst, and I realized that everyone feels like they're the worst. And when I've interviewed you in retreats, it's all varieties of the same thing. And it's wonderful in a way to give back to people, to show people for themselves. And that is what part of the meditation is. You are good enough. In the present, you can only be what you are in the present. The present is what it is. It's sufficient. In the next moment, you're different. And you have to figure out again what you are in the next moment. You are undescribable even to yourself. And then to develop an appreciative relationship with your body and your mind. And then you overcome the third one. Trust again. I trust myself. I trust the relationship that I have with my body and my mind. When I look at it with an appreciative awareness, it performs its function well. It produces calm, it produces insight, it produces loving kindness, compassion, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And then you have a deep insight in who you are. And then the Dharma makes sense, because the Dharma is all of a sudden about you. And so Asanga says, so when that trust relationship with you exists, and therefore with the Dharma, that you know the Dharma is about me, then aspiration arises. Aspiration of I can. Calm is a natural aspect of my mind. I've just been disturbing it all the time. As we talked about yesterday, what is calm is equanimity. It's when the mind becomes natural and spontaneous. We're complaining about the waves while blowing on the water. And we're just free of stopping blowing at the water. We can just put the cup down. And then the water becomes calm quite by itself. So you know it's possible. It's a natural state of my mind. Like insight is not something I have to do. No, I have already the wisdom mental factor. I can just look. I can empower it. It will grow by itself. And so from that aspiration grows something. And there's another word that I would happily chuck. Effort. We also have no idea what that means. Enthusiasm. Because when you get at that stage, your practice becomes self-fueling. You do something, and the doing itself brings enthusiasm. You see what it does to you. And the more you do it, the better it becomes, the more fun it becomes. And so your practice becomes self-sustaining. Study is fun. You can just provide, just put the book in front of you and the rest happens. You pick up the subject of karma, your mind happily walks it through. You sit on your cushion and your mind adores looking deeply, letting go, finding calm and a good heart. And that enthusiasm will lead you on its own to what is often called pliancy, but here I would like to call it serviceability, where your mind becomes effortless in going there where you need it to go. Because now you know what serves your needs. You know what is skillful. And then you can tell the mind, go there, and it just goes there on its own. And that is the end result of calm. That is what we call calm abiding. The mind is still, the mind is balanced, has a deep trust relationship with itself. Not self-esteem, but self-understanding. It knows what is good for it, what serves, what meets its needs and what doesn't. And you can easily, without making effort, bring it to wherever you want to take it. Make sense? Yeah. And so the exposition of Asanga in that sense, what I would like to show you with it is that it is important to translate it into your own experience. So first you study it, you take the text, you see the list, you see the definition, but that's not enough. That doesn't do the trick. So you have to explore, like, what does it mean to me in my own life? What is procrastination? What do I feel when it happens? And so when I judge, I can't look, which is a great opening. Like, it is something that happens. It's not my fault. Maybe my mind has a good reason to procrastinate. Maybe it's a good idea. Who knows? We judge it because everyone tells you it's a bad thing. I don't know. Is it? Look. I just keep looking. Like, why is it doing that? It's only when I don't judge, I can look, I can see. And I see, indeed, it doesn't meet my needs. It makes me nervous. I don't like it, actually. It's counterproductive. And then all of a sudden, simply noticing that it stops. I don't procrastinate because I know the outcome. And I don't like the outcome. But I also know why my mind procrastinates, and I don't. I've taken these conditions away. Anyway, so to say, so you study, but then the contemplation is the practice of making it personal. Like, what does it mean? How does it inform your life? It should be about your lived experience. That's what it's all about. Make it serve you. And then you become a skilled navigator. Remember, there's a beautiful book by, I was about to say the name, and I see the name walking away. It's terrible. Wade Davis, it came back. It's called The Wayfarer. In the Polynesian islands, these islands are massively far away. People cross the entire Pacific Ocean on rafts. And the question is, how do they do that? And the story goes that these people were trained. It actually takes 20 years to train a wayfarer. These are trained from young age onwards, and they can stay awake for weeks at an end. And they are taught to observe. The amount of detail that they can see in waves is beyond imagination. So for 20 years they're trained, but then they can just simply see. They navigate the ship by seeing the sea. They can see from 50 miles away if an island is out there because it changes something about the currents. They know the interaction between the sea, the land, the wind, the sun. And they can just navigate. And that is when your mind is well versed in the Dharma, you become a wayfarer of your own meditative life. You don't do much. You look. That's analytical meditation. You know what you are seeing. And you navigate by which you see. Now, your mind is not like a body of water, because that is often the way we start with meditating on the breath. That's the breath, and that's like, well, an awareness of the breath. Cool. Yeah, but when I look at my own experience, I know the interaction between all the 51 mental factors, and I know that they all happen in specific combinations. I meditated for quite some time on recognizing immediately all kinds of constellations of mental factors. You can see, oh, this is present. Let's add a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that, and I know what it does. It's effortless. I recognize what is real and what is less real. And then you're a wayfarer to awakening. So, to say a little bit about the context. So, as some of you know, I teach an in-depth meditation training, which is offered here in the center. And so the purpose is exactly to bring together the richness of specifically the Tibetan and the Theravada tradition into meditation. I practice both traditions, and I find them to be mutually complementary. At the moment in the third year, so we're well into Madhyamika by now, but I want to show how study and meditation interact, how they are mutually complementary, how one informs the other. And so I teach theory, but only applied theory. So every session, I just recorded one today. It starts with a guided meditation where we explore a new aspect of our experience. And then I spend an hour and a half exploring why that works. Like, what did you just see? And then we try again with that understanding. And so bit by bit, I show something and I explain why you see what you see, or I give you the tools to explore what you're seeing. And people have a whole week to use then the instructions to navigate and apply that to their own lives. And we take another step and another step and another step. Most of the years, next year will be, the final year will be a bit different, but we always start with calm abiding. I'm a great believer in the interaction between calm abiding and special insight. To take one step back is that I found that as a monastic, traveling both traditions, well, let's put it this way. When I became the resident teacher in Amsterdam, I asked myself, like, well, how do I translate a monastic life to students in the center? How do I make accessible to them what was accessible to me? I had a lot of very good personal relationships with my teachers. I actually was quite lucky because my first Theravada teacher with whom I took refuge in 1987 studied Nagarjuna in India when he studied Sanskrit. So I had a Theravada teacher that had made like a journey into Mahayana, and my Tibetan teacher, Geshe Tengye, was sent by His Holiness for 9 years to Thailand to study the monastic vows. And so he spoke fluent Thai. So I had two teachers that both crossed into the other traditions. And that is, I follow simply in the footsteps of my own teachers. And I had access, therefore, to personal guidance, not only abstract philosophy. I have also philosophy teachers, and that's fine. But what I really benefited from were people that could point out to me, how do I use that? And so the in-depth meditation training is my answer to that. I have benefited from them, and so I want to create an environment in which meditation and studies interact. But I teach only philosophy to the extent that you can use it and not the rest. And where you have access to me. So where we have personal relationships. And that's why I will, well, karma willing, my idea is to come back every year so that we can keep meeting each other over and over and over and establish a trust relationship, because trust is not given. Trust is something that you develop. So working together, we can build a trust relationship in which we can all flourish on the path, because it is possible. Lama Zopa Rinpoche kept highlighting, we might not become Buddhas, but the path of accumulation is possible. Generating bodhicitta is possible. And so the first 3 years, we always start first with calm abiding. 2 months simply calming, learning to calm over and over and over, looking at it from different perspectives. 2 months. Then we work on our motivation, like what moves our heart? What causes my mind to go into one direction or another? How do I fuel the directionality of my mind? So the first year is an unconditional attitude, an unconditional wish for one's own freedom. To be able to put the burden down, like this is not acceptable and it's not necessary. And I have the freedom to let it go. I want to let it go. And the second year, we then elaborate, we extend it. We all have exactly the same problem. And you and I are interrelated. My freedom implies yours. So I want it for everyone. You know, I'm the creation of the web of life. Yeah. And we are each other's mother sentient beings. What else would there be to do than to seek everyone's freedom? Yeah. We do that by looking at the 7 cause and effect method. Very simple, straightforward, heartfelt meditation on the basis of understanding how dear we are, in fact, how invaluable we are to each other. How valuable all living beings are to us. And then we engage in yogacara. Yogacara is like from a phenomenological perspective, starting with, because we as Westerners, we are overly obsessed with our external world, to an extent that many modern scientists don't even believe anymore that there is such a thing as mind. I mean, I would say the only thing that we deny, the only thing that is obvious, because there's one thing that I know for sure, that there is an experience. I don't know what the experience there is, and I don't know what I'm having experiences of, but I know for sure that I have an experience, of that there is an experience. And so Yogacara does exactly that. It puts experience in the middle. There is an experience. Let's investigate what it means that there is an experience. What is an experience to begin with? And to see that when we investigate that deeply, is highly liberating to the mind. It puts everything into a very different perspective. It helps us see that the mind is the creator of our world, and that we have an amazing freedom to recreate that creational process. For example, that is the year that we look at the Jataka stories, that the Dharma offers us very deliberately all kinds of narrative patterns, because we make sense of our own selves by social stories to begin with. And we all believe that we need to have a career, but it's a story. And we believe that the story comes from our side, but that's not the case. We were taught that story. And in fact, every story that we use to make sense of ourselves, we got from somewhere else. We are just a product of our own time and culture. And we find out that the Dharma very deliberately offers a whole set of different storylines. Yeah. I have tea. I shall drink it for you. Let's see what happens. Yeah. Yeah. And in the third year, we go a step deeper. We use method, or generating compassion is called exchanging self and others. That takes from the perspective that we are interdependent beings. It looks from the other side, like what is the set of conditions that makes me happen? And to prioritize others as a solution to oneself. That there's a way of prioritizing others that actually heals myself. That does something fundamental to my lived experience, but that's a difficult thing to do. Yeah. So we step it up. And then we look, as we are doing currently at my job, at all things like own existence. The things that exist because they are relational. All things depend on something else for their existence. And in the final year, we will bring this to the next year. I just finished the reader. It's pretty impressed with myself. I got all the text that I wanted to have. We're going to bring all that understanding into the fourth year, into Mahamudra and Tantra, Kriya Tantra. To see how all this understanding of all these different schools culminates in these two practices. Very intuitive practices, but then we come back to your question. Intuitive practices that you can only do when you have a deep understanding. And that is where you can ease up in your practice. Because the wealth of your understanding facilitates these practices, facilitates a very easy practice actually. Mahamudra is easy, Tantra in a way could be easy, if people explain it easily. But that's not often happening. Yeah. I will show you how to do that easily. Yeah. And then we will start from scratch. My idea is that people do it over and over, that we progress together. And because once you've been at the end and you go back to the beginning, you know how the beginning fits the end. So you get a deeper sense of the whole thing. Because all these practices, as I said at the beginning, that's the beauty of the Dharma, everything connects to everything else. Yeah. And so it's offered here through the center. More will be offered. I'm going to add, so this is the in-depth meditation trainings, which focuses on the interaction between the compassionate attitude and insight. And from September onwards, I'm going to add a 2-year training in Lam Rim and preliminary practices to it. And we're going to add quite a few more things. There's already started developing another training on the psychological aspect of meditation, also to make sure that we keep ourselves safe, to also have an insight where things might psychologically go wrong. And we might sometimes be quite blind to our own psychological vulnerabilities, and problems happen. And I also want to add a good training that helps us overcome or protect ourselves against our own vulnerabilities, so we can recognize them and find ways to navigate those problems. Yeah. So we avoid the risks of psychosis and so on and so forth. Yeah. So much is coming. So that whole thing is bundled in something that is called the Buddha Project, and will be offered through the center in Perth. Yeah.
So is this something that we participate in now, during now, or
Yeah.
so we need to wait until?
No, that's exactly my point. Normally, one of my challenges myself, one of the challenges that I encountered, that I often felt, as I said before, that the Dharma is imposed. It becomes a doctrine to hold. And I never thought that was the way to approach it. That is not what the Buddha does in the sutras. So I did the other way around. The Buddha Project is for you. It wraps itself around you and not the other way around. So you can do it in any way you want. So through the center, you have direct access to where we currently are. And so as long as you meditate with a curious mind and you don't self-flagellate, and when I sometimes tell an informative story. At one point, I attended to His Holiness's teachings in Drepung. I was newly ordained. I was ordained for about half a year, and I went with my abbot to India to visit his monasteries, and then we went to the Lösling monastery, Lösling temple in Drepung, because His Holiness was opening it. And remembering sitting in front, and I knew some of the people. Westerners always sitting in front because they need translation. So you have all the high lamas and the geshes, and then all the Westerners. Yeah. And so His Holiness started to teach, and he taught a comparative teaching on the Guhya Samaya Tantra and chanting the names of Manjushri. And if you think like, I don't know what you're saying, exactly, that's the way I felt. I'd never heard of either text. Yeah. And I figured out with the second sentence that I had misunderstood the first one. He started to talk about karma yoga, and I thought that had something to do with cleaning monasteries, and it turned out not to be the case. Yeah. Karma yoga, karma mudra refers to something very different, and that became obvious in the second sentence. And so then he talked for another 2.5 hours. Westerners tend then to become frustrated because we take that as a personal judgment. I am stupid, and then we start quickly then to judge the teacher, because the teacher should not make me feel stupid. The teacher should address my need. I mean, that's the way we work. I mean, that's what egocentrism does to our culture. Yeah. And you sit in between 2,000 people and you think that His Holiness would speak to you. But anyway, so after the 2.5 hours of just listening to what was like random stuff in my ears, I went to one of the geshes sitting beside me, and I said, did you understand it? And he said something that made my day. He says, no, I didn't. But wasn't it beautiful? Because His Holiness is brilliant beyond belief. So he taught at a level that even the geshes could not follow. But for them to hear Chenrezig speak the Dharma in that way is amazing. And they can't wait to run back home and to take Guhya Samaya Tantra and take the chanting the names of Manjushri in every commentary available and figure out what His Holiness just said. They are filled with wonder, like, wow. And so if you can do that, then you can step in whatever you want. I try always to keep it applicable. And if you think like, well, I don't mind if I don't understand something, please just jump in. And that's 2 other things. So all of it is available because I want people to do it in any way that suits them. I still have people in the first year, although we're in the 3rd year. And that's fine. If you want to do another tempo, it's fine. Here is quite late because there's a 6-hour time difference with Holland. I put it in the middle of the afternoon so that it is late here, but feasible here. And it's very early in New York, but also feasible in New York, so that we have a wide range that people that could do it live theoretically, but you don't have to. There's no attendance. There's also no certification, by the way. It is simply to learn to meditate together, to enjoy meditating together, to look at the material in a playful, enjoyable manner and make meditation fun, make this tradition fun. I like it. I mean, I taught the whole afternoon and I was just having a ball. I know that they're going to listen to it. And because it's also for me, I mean, I like this form of engagement. For me as well, Dharma happens. I told you I had no idea what I was talking about. And so now I know. And so then we can do that together. And we can aspire together to achieve, to arrive on the safe shore of the path of accumulation of the Bodhisattva path, because it is doable. That mind wanting to become awakened for all living beings is within our reach. That is doable in this lifetime. Then we can die a safe death because our mind cannot fall back anywhere. Yeah. Then our end of samsara is in sight. And that's really doable. That's the whole aim. Yeah. So you can step in any way you want. You can follow the live teachings, and the advantage of the live teachings is to the community. Yeah. Because you sit together every last Saturday. I mean, there's still 300 people in the training, and on average 120 people follow it live, and the rest does it in their own pace, in their own time. And that's fine. I don't mind. There's WhatsApp groups, right? There's discussion, there's a forum on the website, and I'm accessible. So if you have questions, you simply have my email address, my WhatsApp address, Signal, for that matter. And you can just text me like, I'm running into this problem in meditation. What do I do? And you get an answer. Yeah. So it's personal, it's communal, and it is meditator-centered and not doctrine-centered. Yeah. And bit by bit, we'll build it out into something else. And hopefully bit by bit also enough participants will become skillful enough to start supporting me and engage with it. In fact, in the next training next year, 2 of my students will help me run the program, yeah, which is nice to see that some people really see the same thing. So that 2 people can do that shows you that it is feasible, because they see enough to start guiding other people. Yeah. That's my whole ideal, is that in between 10 and 15 years, I'm completely superfluous. Yeah, then I retire. I give everything to you, and then I find myself a forest hut again, and I close the door, and then bye-bye. You can forget about me, but please meditate on. Yeah, that's the whole point. Yeah. So you're invited to do that, but again, feel free to use it as you wish. Yeah, make sense? Does that leave any other questions? Yeah. Yeah. On Zoom, maybe? Is there questions on Zoom? Nah. Then I would like to finish with a meditation this evening, if I may. I know I always over time, but that's a Tibetan thing, so you can blame the tradition. I'm also a student of Rinpoche. You're lucky that I'm not Rinpoche, because then you would be sitting here until 4 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, I would have a few more things to say. Yeah. Let's take a moment to practice the letting go. The letting go is not a rejection of anything. Letting go is simply setting all things free. And thereby freeing ourselves of the struggle, the friction with the present. When we let go of that struggle, we simply become aware of life. Our own life, and that our lives are intermingled. For as a living being, we depend for our persistence, for our existence, for every aspect of our existence on others. Others have given us this life, our language, our concepts, hopes and dreams, our food and drink, healthcare, our skills. A vast web of interdependent support in which every living creature is necessary. Including ourselves. We are being held and we hold. we can acknowledge what we often take for granted. But in this particular corner of the web of life, we still live a fortunate era. Not only did the Buddha appear, but we are so lucky that the experience of the Buddha comes to our doorstep. Someone told me this afternoon when she moved into Perth, not so far from here, the Buddhist center came towards her. We can see with our own eyes that the enlightened experience is still possible, accessible, doable. There are beings amongst us that serve all living beings and yet are not diminished by that activity, but flourish because of it. In this setting, we can also become aware of the fact that the very fact that we understood the teachings of the Dharma this evening tells us something about our nature. For we can't make sense of things that we don't know. The very fact that your mind made sense of interdependence, of compassion, generosity, calm, equanimity, impartiality. Also means that all of these qualities are part of your being. It means that you have Buddha nature. To dedicate means to become a wayfarer of your own mind. To guide these qualities in a direction that meets your needs. And as you are dependent origination, that meets the needs of all living beings. And so we can dedicate our insights of this evening, the skillful activities of our mind, the imprints that are created, to our awakening. On the great ocean of samsara, we may become islands to ourselves. So that having met all our needs, having accumulated all insights and qualities, we can care for others in the way they need, without requiring anything in return, without judgment or frustration. And to know that this aim, this aspiration, is the true long life prayer for His Holiness Lama Zopa Rinpoche. For they are not idols, they are functions. By practicing the Mahayana path, we participate in their actions, in their wish to care for all living beings. We practice remembering their presence. So that in their friendship we may understand ourselves Buddhas to be. Thank you. That's it. Thank you for being here.